Hello everyone, this is Dick Lucas. This is Shooting from the Hip number 9. Now before I go further, I just want to start off with just an important thing right here. Right now, as we talked about last week, the most important thing to do right now is ask the right questions. There are a lot of unknowns, and I'm going to go through 4 of them right now. We'll talk about more in Howard Marks's memo that we're going to discuss, but we're going through the greatest pandemic of the last century, the greatest economic contraction since the Great Depression, the biggest oil price decline perhaps ever, and the greatest central banking and government intervention ever. So any one of these things would be a very, very big deal, and it'd be very difficult to predict the future and understand what's going to happen next. So I warn you, in any information you read, anyone you listen to, be careful of anyone that is offering you answers right now or certainties about the future. The reality is we are in the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. There's no way to know what's going to happen with 4 huge things going on simultaneously. So what can we do? Well, what we can do is go to Shooting from the Hip with Dick Lucas, produced by Finch, Finley. We can riff on the right questions to ask, and that's what we're going to focus on. That's what throughout these next weeks, months, hell, even years, we're going to ask the right questions, because that's the most important thing right now. So we got a great show. We're going to riff on Howard Marks's latest memo, as we usually do. And we're going to talk about later also how the federal government's paying for all this stimulus stuff. We're going to interview Danielle Ryder and Chris Nash, medical professionals, one out of Massachusetts General, the other out of Wake Forest Baptist. We're talking about Google and Apple, that partnership you may have heard about, their contact tracing, Augur V2 and Libra. These are cryptocurrency projects, very interesting. I want to riff on them. I think cryptocurrency is here. I think it's here to stay, and I think we're going to see some really cool things this next decade from it. We're going to riff on calling it the China virus, what that means. Bill Maher had an interesting little viral monologue on that. We're going to talk about the ramifications of that discussion. Morgan Stanley released a 1-year timeline and what the outlook's looking like. And that's and some other fun stuff sprinkled in, as always. So Shooting from the Hip number 9 every Saturday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. We're streaming on Facebook video today, YouTube, and Twitch. Couldn't get the Periscope working, had to change the settings on there, but we're going to start streaming to more platforms, so this is all new. Also, we got to change this music. Boom. So now we're out of the intro. Boom. Now you shouldn't be hearing any music. We got some transition stuff going on. It's pretty chill. Okay, so this is... we got a chat room on YouTube. Also, make comments on Facebook. Charlie Finch, Finley, the producer, he'll be in these chat rooms, and we'll be collecting some questions. Any comments? Tell me I'm wrong. Let's riff on that at the end. I'll riff on some of those comments, and we'll and give you my hot take on them. David Abergale, Sarah Lucas, and Rebecca. Thank you for becoming Patreon supporters. So me and Charlie aren't breaking even on this, not even close. So any support Patreon, David Abergale, shout out to you, Brother Beast. Some of you don't know, you can contribute monthly to the show, and that goes to a whole bunch of things. The cost of keeping this thing going, plus it gives you extra perks. So you can get the entire show notes for the show. You can get in the community we have there. We got a riff session in there. We also got some other fun things that you can go backstage on the Zoom call, where we have the interviewees. So there's some cool little perks that you can unlock just at $3 a month. We really appreciate that. Okay, so this is. I also want to start by 12:30 I should say is when we're gonna have the docs. Well, one of them's a doctor, one of them's an MD candidate. We're gonna have them on at 12:30, so that's in 26 minutes. So we'll have them on. So look forward to that. But before that, we're gonna riff on this stuff. So I want to just something to color this entire discussion here. Also, we're indoors, by the way. It was raining outside, so we're trying a new setup. So sorry about that for those that like the outdoor riff sesh, but this is where we're at. We had to improvise. So we're going to talk about some of the actions the Fed's doing, government intervention, stuff like that. Now, I'm not here to get everyone riled up. I'm not here to talk about things. Like I said, the most important thing is we ask the right questions. I'm not here to say, oh, the government's bailing everyone out. I'm here. I think those are reasonable questions. I think it's reasonable to ask how much government intervention is too much intervention, how much intervention from the Fed, the central bank of the United States, is too much. I think these are interesting questions. We're going to riff on it. Let's see. Also, the last major government stimulus intervention was the Great Financial Crisis in 2008. Now, that I think you can draw a line from that to populism to Trump, and I think you can also draw a line. That's where the Tea Party came out of. So I know it's a little early to be talking like this, but I'm I am interested to see what's going to come out of the trillions of dollars, not only what the Fed's doing, but also the stimulus that the federal government is spending. There's going to be some interesting ramifications of this. Right now, we're in the middle of it, so who knows what's going to happen, but there's some interesting ramifications. The government can't do this much, this quickly, and not have some fallout happen from it. So I think it's important. I think that this, honestly, the biggest thing that I have my mind on right now is not the pandemic. It's not COVID-19. The most interesting thing to me right now, and maybe even bigger than the pandemic, is the actions, the unprecedented actions by the Fed and by the federal government. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't be doing these things, what the actions they are doing. I'm saying it is absolutely unprecedented what they are doing. So it's worth talking about. It's worth asking the questions about that. Obviously, these are all caused by COVID-19. But I think we're going to get through COVID, obviously, and we've talked about that. But I think what may be, what also will leave a big scar on our society, or at least change the way of doing things, is the actions by the Fed and the central government. So let's riff on this. So Howard Marks had his latest memo. As always, he quoted Mark Lipsitch. You may have heard of this guy. He's a Harvard epidemiologist. And he says this, and he's put this in his other memos before. Howard Marks is an investor out of Oak Tree Capital, and he just releases right now basically every week just his hot take on the markets, and also not a hot take, it's fucking 9 pages, but his take on what's going on. And I think he's really good, because I think he's good at asking questions. That's what he does. That's his thing. And like I said, right now I think its most important thing is to ask the right question. So he says this. He quotes Mark Lipsitch. He says, there are facts, there are informed extrapolations from analogies to other viruses, and then the third thing is there's opinion and speculation. So it's important to separate these. Whenever you hear anyone talking about this, there's facts, there's informed speculation on those facts, and then there's complete, there's an opinion, flat out opinion and speculation. So it's important to distinguish between those things. So, and he also is the one that he where I got those 4 major things that are happening, and I'm going to say them again. Greatest pandemic since the Spanish flu of the last century, right? Greatest economic contraction since the Great Depression happened 80 years ago. Greatest oil price decline since the OPEC era, and the greatest central bank and intervention of all time. Again, these are 4 huge things. Any one of them would be a huge deal, would be a huge would have fucking CNN, MSNBC. They would have them clogged, any one of these things, with coverage. But we have all 4 at once. When you have all 4 uncertain things all banging against each other, it's a hell of a position to be making certain statements about the future, which is why we're going to cover questions. So there's an interesting he has an interesting, I'm going to read this, an interesting paragraph here that he quotes. I'll give you, in short, he says, it's my view that if you're experiencing something that has never been seen before, you simply can't say you know how it'll turn out. So he also quotes someone from a professor of psychology, David Dunning from University of Michigan. I'm going to read this because I think it's interesting. So he says, this is David Dunning. He says, an ignorant mind is precisely not a spotless, empty vessel, but one that's filled with the clutter of irrelevant or misleading life experiences, theories, facts, intuitions, strategies, algorithms, heuristics, metaphors, and hunches that regrettably have the look and feel of useful and accurate knowledge. This clutter is an unfortunate byproduct of one of our greatest strengths as a species. We are unbridled pattern recognizers and theorizers. Often our theories are good enough to get us through the day, or at least to an age when we can procreate. But our genius is for creative storytelling, combined with our inability to detect our own ignorance, can sometimes lead to situations that are embarrassing, unfortunate, or downright dangerous, especially in a technologically advanced, complex, democratic society that occasionally invests mistaken popular beliefs with immense destructive power. And he says, war in Iraq. He was talking about that, and it's from We Are All Confident Idiots. So keep that in mind. I think, a way that I think about this is, do you ever think something and then you sleep on it, or wait a couple days and you look back and say, what the fuck was I thinking? Well, you were probably in a certain state, you were probably feeling a certain thing, you were probably mad, or you were probably pissed off, or there was something going on that made you think that thing, but in that moment you felt it was 110% correct, and all it took was a little bit of time to realize what a jackass you were. Okay, so I want you to think, and this is true of not just, it's true of everyday life, but especially when you're talking about political things, when you're seeing something on the news that gives you, for lack of a better word, triggered, or something that really activates you. Sit with it, if something really gets you pissed, there's a chance there's something else going on there, and maybe that person or thing isn't as wrong as you think, or less wrong than you think. And the reality is, with these 4 simultaneously huge history-crushing things going on, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. So sink in and get used to it, baby. So in other words, he says, we may not be able to know the future, but that doesn't keep us from reaching conclusions about it and holding them firmly. So be very careful about holding solid opinions about what the fook is going to happen. We don't know. The only thing we know, the only thing that we can do is do the little things to keep ourselves safe, our family, our community safe, our friends safe. Put one foot in front of the other. That's the only thing we can know. Other things, you get further outside that, it gets less and less certain. Focus on the things you can control. Okay, so here's some questions. He has some really good questions. There's a lot of things we don't know about COVID-19 right now. We don't know how the virus that causes the disease. We don't know how it spreads. Or we don't know everything about how it spreads. So he's got some interesting questions here. So there's a lot of unknowns right now. And he points them out here. He says, will testing and contact mapping facilitate keeping infected people out of circulation? Will large numbers of asymptomatic infections impede the effort to isolate carriers? Will it be possible to test people to learn whether they've had the disease and developed antibodies, such that they can go out in public without fear of reinfection? Will herd immunity develop? Will it be permanent? Will the arrival of warm weather be helpful? Will a cure be developed? Will the virus morph into other forms requiring new cures? Will a vaccine be developed, and when? These are all things we don't know. So you may have heard different takes on some of these questions. The reality is we don't have conclusive answers to these, which is why the band of possibilities, you'll hear one person say one thing and one person say the other, and they're completely opposite side of the spectrum. The funny thing is they're not wrong. Maybe someone's saying the worst case, someone's saying the best case. You can't call them wrong. What they are doing, they shouldn't be so certain that their case is the right one. It's a possibility. I think a lot of the people saying things right now aren't necessarily wrong. They're only saying one of the possibilities, and that's the issue. You can't say only one of the possibilities and say that this is what's going to happen. You need to give some lip service to the other fucking possibilities, because there's a range of possibilities, and you don't just choose one and say that's the one. Well, it's a possible one. It doesn't mean this person's wrong. It doesn't mean they're an idiot. It means they need to give the other possibilities space. They need to give them. They need to talk about it, and they need to start out. But when they make assertions, you need to be honest about what we don't know, which is why I love Howard Marks, and which is why I share him with y'all. Okay, so he says another thing: how we make. Okay, so he talks about opening up. So how will we make that trade-off? There's no algorithm for deciding whether to favor life for a few or thousands versus economic improvement for millions. So we're going to keep riffing on this. As it relates to the automobile industry, he has a great, let's see, who's this from? He quotes someone here. Here's how investor Edward Lampert in the New York Sun on April 6th puts it. So he's going to compare automobiles are risky, and it's also he's going to compare that to COVID-19. So here's what it says, and it's a great point, because I think it's very easy for people to say, obviously, Trump's made comments, free, he's tweeted out free Michigan, free whatever. That's a jackass thing to say. But I think it's easy to be on one extreme or the other. It's very easy to say, no, we have to keep it locked down. Of course we keep it locked down. Well, you may have a job where you can work remotely. It's not a big deal for it to be locked down. Or you may be in a situation where it's okay. You got fast internet, you got your family with you, and it may be okay for you to be locked down, and you don't need to get somewhere. You don't need to go do these things. You don't need to do your job. So it's very easy to look at these things. And I'm not saying how Trump has handled this has been right at all. What I am saying is it's not one or the other. Okay. So here's what he says. Driving an automobile is risky. In 2018, the number of auto-related fatalities in the United States was 36,000. Yet we don't ban automobiles, nor do we impose a 10-mile-an-hour speed limit. Doing so would eliminate most of those deaths and injuries, but would also adversely affect economic activity enabled by faster transportation of people and products. Overall, the benefits of automobile exceeds the cost. Individuals knowingly assume the risk. Businesses compete to make money by reducing those risks, to deal with market failures and externalities, and to provide a certain minimum floor. We have regulatory mechanisms imposed by government to mitigate risk and compensate for losses. These same approaches can be useful in guiding the public policy response to the coronavirus, showing the way to a middle ground that minimizes harm without excessive cost to either the economy or individual freedom. We need to get America back to work quickly. Businesses and individuals can adapt dynamically to intelligently guard their interests, seek opportunities, and make trade-offs. The government can provide the traffic signals and the safety standards. That approach to public health is consistent with a free and economically vibrant country rather than in conflict with it. it's tested on our highways every day. So I think that's just an interesting comparison that, it's not just either full lockdown and we can't have any discussion of when we're going to open up. I think it's certainly, with all the questions we just covered, it's certainly too early to say, let's just open everything up. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is there's a very real cost to remaining locked down. And that cost may be greater for someone else that is not you. Okay, so here we go. And we got Danny and Chris. I'm just hearing from Charlie, Finch, Finley. We've got Danny and Chris. They are live. They're ready to be on. Well, they're not live yet. We got 15 minutes, but they're ready when we are. So we appreciate them coming out. We got about 15 minutes before, so they're in the waiting room. We love that you're here. Let's riff. Okay, so here we go. Assuming the quarantine is lifted. Here's some other questions outside of the government keeping us locked down. When will you take your first flight? How will you react when the person next to you starts coughing? What has to happen to make you feel it's safe to send your child back to school? What will happen when everyone returns to work? Allergy season begins and a few of your colleagues begin to sound nasally and cough persistently. Well, you'll fire them. Just kidding. When you go out to dinner with your wife, husband, friend, family, do you want to be served by a waiter or waitress wearing a mask and gloves? I'll add 2 more. Well, this is what he says. If a test says you have immunity, will you stop social distancing and go back into public spaces while new infections are still being reported? And for us New Yorkers, when will you get back on the subway? So there's 2 things to this, right? People, the government can open things up and say, okay, it's safe, but then there's the whole thing about, well, when do individuals feel safe to go out? When do families feel safe to go out? When do communities feel safe to go out? So everyone is going to make that decision on their own. So it's not just the government's going to flip a switch. And also, it's a federal system, people. So we have states' rights, 10th Amendment. We saw that. We saw Cuomo talking about that last few days. Every state's going to make their own decision, and every person within that state's going to make their decision as well. Okay, so that's the COVID stuff. So now we're going to talk more about what the Fed's doing. So he has a section in this memo, and I'm going to link to all this stuff. I should have mentioned that. All this stuff I'll link to, so you can read it. I highly recommend you read through this whole thing. I'm going to cover the highlights here. Damn, I basically just highlighted this whole thing. I might have to rush through it. Okay, here's the deal. So he has a section. It's called Washington Goes to Battle, and this is what I was saying. The Fed's actions are absolutely unprecedented, and it's worth asking serious questions about them, pandemic or not. So here's the deal. Another thing I should preface this. So you're going to hear things like, oh, this is the biggest intervention that the Fed, and I've literally said, I've said this is the biggest intervention in the history of, government, with how big the stimulus was, the CARES Act, 2.1 trillion, the Fed pumping in trillions. So here's the deal. Because our economy is bigger, basically any time something happens where the government needs to step in, it's going to be the biggest in history, right? Part of the reason this is bigger than the global financial crisis, the government intervention, is because the economy is bigger, so the numbers are going to be bigger, so it's going to take more money to keep things going. So part of this is just natural. So it's not necessarily that this is a bigger deal. It's looking like it's a bigger deal. I mean, it is a bigger deal than the global financial crisis, I think. But part of it is the economy is bigger, so it's going to take more to keep it going. So this is what he says. Okay, so CNBC reports that the Federal Reserve has dramatically expanded its efforts to save the economy, even adding junk bonds to the list of assets it can buy, as a wave of businesses are anticipated to have trouble surviving the expected recession. The Washington Post editorializes. So this is a Washington Post headline. The Fed is putting its balance sheet at the service of the private sector for what we must hope is the shortest period absolutely necessary. Okay, so an editorial in the Wall Street Journal, which I'm going to riff on a little bit more here. The Wall Street Journal, and this is the Wall Street Journal. This is a market-friendly, capitalism-friendly, business-friendly publication that says views the Fed's moves as a misstep that increases the Fed's exposure to risky assets and overlooks Main Street in favor of Wall Street. The decision also poses a threat to traditional concept of American capitalism as the Fed and Treasury become the leading lenders to U.S. businesses. Okay, so he goes on. He says, limitless is an interesting word because the Fed had said they will, they're basically going to do whatever it takes. So is the program really limitless? And is that okay? The stimulus loans, bailouts, benefits, and bond buying that have been announced thus far add up to several $1 trillion. What are the implications of the resultant additions to the federal deficit in the Fed's balance sheet? To be facetious, the government could send every American a check for $1 million at a cost of $330 trillion. Would there be negative consequences from doing this, such as increased inflation and a downgrade of U.S. creditworthiness, or the dollar losing its status as the world's reserve currency? If the answer is yes, is there a point below $330 trillion at which those ramifications might kick in? Okay, so it's in extreme situations, and we saw this with some of the legislation that happened after 9/11. In extreme situations, it's very easy to say the Fed should do whatever it takes. Okay, well, what if his point is that there's a point at which they could do possibly too much. It is possible. I mean, conceivably, the Fed didn't give everyone $1 million, and there's a reason for that, right? There would be serious ramifications of that. So there is a point. It is a reasonable thing, and I hate when this happens in discussion. It is a reasonable thing to say both that, okay, the Fed needs to be taking extreme action right now, but also, when does it end? How much is too much? We need to think about these things. So here's what he says. Finally, I want to talk about the Fed's role and the impact of its behavior. Just 2 months ago, I love this. Listen to this. This is Howard Marks speaking. Just 2 months ago, I attended a dinner with the president of one of the 12 Federal Reserve banks. I asked him whether the Fed might adopt the tactic of buying corporate bonds, given the limited room for rate cuts. No, he said it would only buy government and agency obligations. As mentioned above, a few weeks ago, the Fed added investment-grade bonds to its buying list, and last week it dropped down to include some high-yield securities. Triple B's downgraded to double B, and some high-yield ETFs. Okay, so famously, the Japanese central bank has been buying equities and has been buying pieces of companies to keep them to inflate them now, or keep the prices up. Now, this was as a result of the global financial crisis. They started doing this, and they were doing this before the pandemic. The Fed has done some of this, but up until now, not to this level and not to this amount. So we're seeing unprecedented actions by the Fed. And just so we're clear, just a quick little tidbit on what the Fed is. People talk about the Fed. What is it? The Fed is a central bank. What does the central bank do? Well, it's an independent thing. The president appoints the people, the top dogs in it. But basically, what they do is they set the interest rate, basically the cost of money that the banks use as a benchmark, and then that determines basically how easy it is for businesses to get loans. So if they drop that interest rate, if they make it lower, it's easier for businesses to get loans. And the reason that you don't just drop it all the way to zero all the time is because, well, it can create bubbles. If money's too easy to come by, that can have bad ramifications for the economy. And also what they do is they buy treasuries. So what's a treasury, right? A treasury is how the government funds itself, right? The federal government releases treasuries of varying maturity dates. It's basically the government sells a treasury, and private people, corporations, other governments buy those treasuries, and they get interest from it. So the Fed does this to affect interest rates. That's one of the ways. That's one of the tools in their toolkit. But right now they're doing more. They're not just buying government treasuries. They're buying junk bonds. They're buying bonds in, for example, Ford. Ford has some bonds. The government is buying Ford bonds. And that just happened. They're not targeting Ford. Ford just happened to fall into that basket. But it's unprecedented. It's unprecedented action. So it's worth it. It's worth it to ask these questions. Is it too much? Okay. So in other words, we're in a regulatory wonderland where there's no pretense that financial statements have to be accurate or current. Okay. I was particularly surprised by these latter actions. What's the Fed's purpose in buying non-investment grade debt? Does it want to make sure all companies are able to borrow regardless of their fundamentals? Does it want to protect bondholders from losses and even market-to-market declines? Who will do the buying for the government and make sure the purchase prices aren't too high and defaulting issuers are avoided? Or doesn't anyone care? And why should the SEC provide relief to leverage investment vehicles? If such an entity proves to be over-leveraged and sees its collateral marked down such that it's constricted or even liquidated, what's the loss to society? Why should leveraged investors, ostensibly not systematically important, be protected from the pain? Okay. In the aftermath of the global financial crisis, the Fed and Treasury undertook a number of actions to encourage price discovery, rekindle risk-bearing, and reopen markets. They worked well. Their goals were accomplished, and the U.S. recovery from the global financial crisis was swift and strong. Of course, we can debate whether the willingness to bear risk snapped back too fast and too far, but some of these things were done through encouraging the operation of market mechanisms, not direct action. Now bonds are being bought and rules waived. Is there a point at which these things become undesirable? Most of us believe in the free market system is the best allocator of resources. So that he goes on. He's asking a whole bunch of good questions here, and the whole partly what makes the allocation of capital work and companies invent new things and how they do and how they perform well is that there's risk, right? They're gonna do what's in the best interest of their shareholders, and they're going to do what's in the best interest of the future of the company, and that's by making good decisions. Well, if the government's always going to come here and buy your debt when shit hits the fan, are they going to be a little less prudent? Are they going to be a little more risky? Maybe. These are worth it questions to ask. So he said a company uses its cash and perhaps borrows more to repurchase its shares. A corporate acquirer chooses to use more leverage rather than less. In each case, the chosen tactic will magnify profits if things go well, but it will also magnify losses if things go poorly and reduce the probability of surviving tough times. If these parties get to enjoy the fruits of their actions when they're successful, but are protected from loss when they fail, risk-taking is encouraged and risk aversion is suppressed. So this is why we're not really hearing it right now. But the Occupy Wall Street movement that happened in the global financial crisis, I really think that these types of questions right now, we're dealing with COVID-19, that's kind of top of mind, but there's going to be serious questions about what the Fed was doing and what it was buying with taxpayer dollars to bail out some of these some of these risky assets and the holders of these risky assets. I mean, most people aren't holding junk bonds, right? But the Fed made the decision to purchase those. I mean, your average person isn't. So who's holding those? Pension funds certainly are. Investors are. So it's worth asking the question, if the Fed is printing money to buy all that, why did you're going to say, well, why did I only get a $1,200 check? Now these are worth a question. Now I'm not making a value judgment on it. I'm saying it's a very interesting thing that's going on right now, and it's worth asking questions about. Okay, so there's an old saying variously attributed to the effect that capitalism without bankruptcy is like Catholicism without hell. It appeals to me strongly. Markets work best when participants have a healthy fear of loss. It shouldn't be the role of the Fed or the government to eradicate it. Loss is good. When things fail, that's good. Companies fail, not on the whole, not always, but it's a good thing, because what happens, that company's gone, boom, another company, that capital that was allocated there, boom, goes to more effective enterprises. That's how it works. That's how capitalism works. That's why we all have supercomputers in our pockets. So some people argue these days that there's no way those who took on leverage that turned out to be excessive could have expected to anticipate a pandemic and the resultant damage of the economy. Thus, the argument goes, the jam the government is rescuing them from isn't their fault, meaning the bailout isn't unreasonable. As I wrote in Which Way Now, I understand they aren't guilty of having ignored a likely risk, but unlikely and even unforeseeable things happen from time to time, and investors and business people have to allow for the possibility and to expect and bear the consequences. I see no reason why financiers should be bailed out simply because the event they're being harmed by was unpredictable. Okay, in the Wall Street Journal, we get in a few minutes. We're gonna have Chris and Danny on here, I just want to read a couple things from this Wall Street Journal piece. So it says systematic risk until the virus crisis, but make no mistake, the Fed is protecting Wall Street first. Now, they said the Fed is protecting Wall Street first. This is the Wall Street Journal saying this. This is a market-friendly, capitalist-friendly, business-friendly publication. All this adds up to the following contrast. A future of American capitalism at risk in a way even the financial panic did not. The Fed and Treasury are becoming the main lenders to American businesses, and in this storm there is no choice. But will they recede when the virus is defeated? Mr. Powell said Thursday that this is a truly rare intervention by the Fed, which will retreat when the virus plague is over. But that is what the Fed also said during the financial panic, and it never did come close to normalizing policy. If the shutdown lasts for more weeks, the Fed could become America's lender of first resort. So what's interesting is you can go on the Fed's website and you can see how many trillions they own. I think they own about 6 trillion in assets of things. They've printed money basically, and they've purchased these assets, right? It's on their books, and you can see a huge jump. The line just goes straight up. This is an official government website. This isn't someone on Twitter trying to get a bunch of followers showing you some crazy graph. It's literally on the official government website. They are purchasing a shit ton of securities. And what's interesting, if you look at during the global financial crisis, you see that it spiked, and then about like a year and a half ago, I'll link to it, but it started going down. So the Fed was finally starting to unwind some of these positions and sell these positions back into the market, get it off their books. And you saw a slight dip, but then about 6 months ago, it started going up again, even before the pandemic. And then now pandemic hit, whoosh, it just exploded. So what's going to be interesting is what comes out of this. Is the Fed going to get used to this? Is this the new normal? Are they always going to be here as soon as there's even a hint of a recession? Are they always just going to be, boom, flood the system with money? Well, failure is a good thing. I mean, look at it in everyday life. When you fail at something, you learn to get better. When a business fails, they could possibly go bankrupt, right? But a bankruptcy doesn't mean they shut everything down. That means it's a package bankruptcy, and they figure out things that need to change, maybe a change of leadership, shit like that. Doesn't mean everyone's going to lose their job. So it's an interesting thing. So he ends with this, and then we're going to have Dr. Nash and Danielle on in about 2 minutes. Here we go. So, but Justin Beal, my artist son-in-law, is mystified. I don't get it, he told me on Saturday. The virus is rampant, business is frozen, and the government's throwing money all over the place, even though tax revenues have to be down. How can the market be rising so strongly? We'll find out as the future unfolds. That Howard Marks, I love it, leaving us with, as he always does, with just some food for thought, not a declarative statement. A quick thing, and then we'll get our interview started. A quick thing when people look at, job losses reported, and then the stock market still went up. So it's important to understand the stock market is future earnings, right? So it's a representation of people's belief in how well these companies are going to do in the future. So it's possible that the job unemployment claims were 5 million, but the market already assumed that maybe they were going to be 6 million, and then it turns out they were less, and then the market jumped. So it's basically a look into what investors think about the future. It's not as if a piece of news comes out and then the market changes immediately to that. Sometimes it does, but a lot of the times it's just a future outlook on what people think is going to happen. So it's not a one-to-one match. So, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, follow her on Twitter. I don't agree with a lot of what she says, but I like to keep my ear to the ground. And there was a picture that went viral on CNBC about the number of job unemployment claims, and then how the market still exploded. The thing is, it's not a one-to-one match. So that's something that's a little clickbaity, and it's a little, well, that's not how things work. But it is an interesting thing. Well, the economy, the market isn't down that much from where it was. So it's an interesting thing. Is the Fed doing too much for the prices of equities, for the prices of bonds? They're doing too much to prop up that market, and not enough for your average Joe, if you will. So these are interesting questions. Now, I don't have answers to them right now. I think answers will become clear a little later. We're in the middle of it, people. So right now we ask the questions, and we're not going to do much more than that. Okay, so here we go. We're gonna make sure that this works. Let's see, make sure my audio's here. Okay, so we have Fukin. Very, very lucky that they're joining us here. In fact, we're gonna change the old boom. You can see their nice photos right there. Okay, we have Dr. Chris Nash here, resident physician at Massachusetts General and Brigham and Women's Hospital. And we also have Danielle Ryder. She's an MD candidate at Wake Forest Baptist Health. Are you with me, people? Are you there?
I'm here. Yep, we're here.
Okay, wow, they are there. Thank you so much for joining, people. I love it. You're coming in loud and clear. Okay, so first things first, thank you so much for joining. I just want to hear just generally, and Danielle, we can start with you. What have you been seeing? What were you seeing? And what have you been seeing? What was your general kind of boots on the ground feel of what's been going on with all this?
Yeah, totally. So just to provide some kind of background, I'm a third-year medical student at Wake, and how medical school works is the first 2 years are didactic, so you're in a classroom in a lecture hall learning from books, and then the second 2 years are in the hospital, getting firsthand clinical experience and working alongside physicians. So I'm in my third year, and I had just started my pediatrics rotation when this all kind of started. I began in infectious diseases, which is not where you want to be when a pandemic breaks out, but it was a good experience. So I can tell you that on March 4th, when I was going into the pediatric ED to see a patient, I went to gown up outside of a patient's room, and the cart outside of the room was completely empty. There were no gloves, there were no gowns, there were no masks. So I was like, okay, that's strange. And I walked down the hall to try a different cart, and same thing. So I ended up going to the nurse's station and asking the nurse, like, where's all the protective equipment? And she said that families had been taking them because they were so panicked by the rising COVID situation that they'd been stealing the masks, and there weren't enough for providers. So the nurse actually only had one box of masks behind the nursing station, and that was what we were working with. So that was the situation in March.
Wow, and that's when it became real for you.
Totally.
Right on. Okay, Chris, Doctor Chris Nash, what do you got for us? What's been your take with working with all this in the hospitals?
So I work in the emergency department, and that it should be said right now. I'm only speaking just in my own experiences. It's not speaking for Mass General for the Brigham, but I'll tell you a little bit about what it's been like.
Absolutely.
I think what I have been seeing is there was this eerie calm as for the first maybe around a month ago, before it really started picking up in Boston, what we were seeing was the emergency departments were eerily calm and people weren't coming. And one thing to know as a background in the ER is that we'll take care of anybody who comes every time. Nobody gets turned away. We see every patient if they're willing to wait and stay for us.
Right.
Which means that a lot of people come for things that aren't necessarily emergencies. That could be a sprained ankle, it could be whatever else. And granted, people aren't outside, so people aren't getting in car accidents as much, and people aren't rolling their ankles as much anymore. But when all of that volume dropped, as people are trying their best not to come to a place where they're much more at risk than where they are at home, it became like kind of a ghost town, which in some ways was really nice, but was really eerie. And like
right.
I've been working in ERs for years, and that was a big change. And I think it makes your hairs rise up on the back of your neck. Within the last 2.5 or so weeks, it started getting sick, meaning we're starting to get to the point where we're starting to have peak numbers of cases where patients come in breathing extremely fast, can't catch a breath, can't even talk. And we need to intubate, and I myself have intubated 3 patients for this.
And can you talk about what that means exactly? Because I wasn't familiar with it until you told me about it earlier. So what does that process look like, and what does that mean?
Sure. So the idea is if we think patients are not breathing well enough on their own, then we put them on a ventilator. And a ventilator is a machine that pumps air into the lungs, usually via a tube that goes into the trachea, which is your windpipe. And in order to do that, we need to sedate people so that they're comfortable. So essentially, you get put into a medically induced coma. You may be paralyzed as well, just for safety, to insert the tube. And then the thing that's scary about it is if you're at the point where you need intubation, it may take a week or more often than not more, to be able to be at a point where your lungs have healed well enough that you can come back off of that ventilator. And so what I'm trying to describe is that we're seeing people who are critically ill in a way that I haven't seen in all of residency so far, and it's terrifying. And I think I'm a little luckier than Danielle is. I actually have access to PPE. I haven't had an issue. My hospitals have done a very good job of at least guaranteeing me some of what we need. I have a mask for every shift. We may be using them longer than we ever dreamed we would in the past, but I have them. But nonetheless, you spend the whole shift. I don't wear anything below my elbows anymore. My wedding ring, which I usually wear on my hand, goes on a necklace around my neck. I'm sort of wiping myself down constantly, either the goggles that I'm wearing over top or face shields. Using hand sanitizer like crazy, just trying my damnedest not to get sick.
Right. Has that situation with regards to the protective equipment, has that improved? So it sounds like you said it's stabilized, and you've implemented different strategies to handle it. But has it improved over time, or has it been where it was 3 weeks ago, for example?
For us, and I think I should make sure that whoever's listening knows that the hospitals I work at have a lot of financial power and a lot of buying power. So we probably have a much better situation than the majority of hospitals, and certainly better than anything in New York. We're just very blessed and lucky in that regard. But not only have we been able to secure new supplies of N95 masks, and I can talk about the different types of masks if that's helpful, but also we've purchased machines that can help sanitize these N95s for reuse. So we're actually, our hospitals are sanitizing N95s for reuse for more than just our own hospitals. We're going to try and start providing reusable N95 masks to the majority of New England. So it's getting a little bit better, I would say.
Epic. Actually, I would love just a quick rundown on what are the main types of masks healthcare professionals are using right now.
There are 2 or 3 big buckets. One is a regular surgical mask, which is a paper mask that you see people wearing around on the streets. And if you watch, I don't know, I haven't seen much Grey's Anatomy, but what I'm imagining they're wearing when they're in the OR is just a little paper mask that clips around your ears. And then an N95 mask has to be fitted, which is why I think it's a little bit silly that so many people have tried to purchase them. I mean, I don't know, it's not silly. They're trying to protect themselves, and I get it. But it has to have a good seal. You need to not have a beard for it to have a good seal, or else it leaks around the side. And basically, it's a filter that goes in front of your face that filters out to a very small particle size, which we think it's the particle sizes that filter through are actually larger than the virus, but we think the virus is suspended in droplets that do get caught in that filter. So essentially, for the purposes of doing a procedure that causes something called aerosolization, where viral particles get spewed further into the room as opposed to just suspended by larger droplets, which is what happens when you're talking.
Right.
We think that droplet protection, meaning like when they're just talking, doing ordinary things, we think that a surgical mask is probably sufficient. But if you're doing anything that is causing aerosols to be formed, you have to be wearing an N95 to be safe, and everybody in the room does. So that's why we want them so much for healthcare settings, is because most ordinary people are not going to be in situations where an N95 level of security is going to be required. At least this is the best of our understanding right now. But if I'm intubating someone, I'm at risk, and so I need an N95.
Got it. And when you say they need to be formed or fitted, or I forgot the word you used, is that a process that anyone can do themselves, or what is that? What exactly does that mean?
No, there are standard sizes, but you have to make sure that the mask itself, that brand mask, physically conforms to your face well enough that it actually does its job. So whenever we get yearly fit tests where we make sure that there's like a brand that I know fits for me, gives me a good seal. We wear these hoods, and then there's like a little squirt of something you can taste. And then you practice talking, moving your face around, and if you can taste it, then that means that that filter or that seal is not good enough for you. So a good example I have is there's a green type of N95 that does fit for me, and our hospitals have secured a source of another type of N95 that, although the seal fits fine on my face, I can taste the substance that they use to test, so that one doesn't work for me.
Right.
If you don't get tested, you don't have any sense of whether or not that mask is any better than a regular surgical mask for your face for that type of mask.
Got it. And the idea is that when you're breathing in, any air that's going into your lungs, into your mouth, and your nose is coming through that filter first. Is that the idea?
Exactly, and not leaking around the sides of the mask.
Right. So, and when you those surgical masks that you were talking about, that you mentioned, a lot of people are those are the kind of the standard ones you see in Grey's Anatomy, and the ones that people are wearing around. How effective are those?
Those are very effective for droplet.
Right.
And more importantly, they're very effective if you're the one producing the droplets. So it spares the people around you, which is why we're now trying to get people to wear them out in public. It's somewhat about protecting you, but it's also protecting others if you happen to be an asymptomatic person with the virus, because it catches them. It doesn't allow it to spew out. But we think it's pretty effective for droplets. It would be entirely ineffective if there were aerosolizing procedures happening.
Got it. Epic. I appreciate that rundown. Okay, so this is a question for both of you. And I love asking this question to people I have on here. Is there something about the standard narrative that you're seeing in the media that you think is being missed, or even around the dinner table? Is there something that you think a lot of people are thinking about what's going on that you wish you could kind of just shake everyone in the United States or the world and be like, no, here's actually what the deal is? Is there anything like that kind of, as medical professionals, that's kind of making you a little crazy and you wish people understood?
Dan, you can go first.
Kind of tough. I mean, I think what most people don't know is, and what obviously I can speak to my experience only, is just the impact this is going to have on future medical professionals. I mean, there's 70,000 medical students, and we're all kind of stuck in this awkward limbo of not being allowed into the hospital. So we're not getting the experience that we normally would. And they're going to have to come up with some kind of adaptation. Either we're going to have a huge physician shortage, or we're going to have less experienced physicians going into residency. So I'm not sure how they're going to kind of balance that out.
Right. I think I hadn't even thought of that. So is there anything that your school is telling you now about what they might do? Is it possible they extend the schooling, or have they been hush on strategies on how they'll work around this?
So communication has been fairly limited because they just don't have answers, right? I mean, if nationally they haven't made a decision, it's hard to make a local decision. But they're thinking we might get to come back in June, and currently we're kind of enrolled in an online curriculum that they threw together to try and at least get us some of the learning still while not able to be present. but it's definitely different. Like all of the national board exams are canceled, so we're supposed to take step 2 at the end of third year, and that's been postponed. I think even residency exams, Dr. Nash, are being canceled or postponed as well.
Yeah, that's true. All sorts of standardized testing are kind of on hold for now.
Got it. Right on. Also, Dr. Nash, same question for you with regards to you think what's missing in the standard narrative, if anything. I don't want to force your hand on this.
I think there's two narratives. I think there's a narrative that comes from science that is pretty consistent with how I think about it, which is please stay home, please get us PPE if you can. This virus is real and it kills something like 1% of the people who get infected, which if a large enough percentage of the United States gets infected, is going to leave maybe up to multiple millions dead. And so far we've been flattening the curve, so I hope that doesn't happen. And then there's a counter narrative which pretends that this is all overblown and not worth the economic impact. And there's something called, and this is again all my opinion,
totally.
There's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is people are at home and have nothing better to do, and they begin to try to learn about this stuff. And the concept of the Dunning-Kruger effect is that when people have no experience with something, as they start to learn about something a little bit, they become very, very confident in the information they know. And then over time, with more experience, you realize just how much out there is to understand. And ultimately, you're able to truly build expertise in something. But the concept is that the curve has two peaks. The first peak being usually called Mount Stupid, and then over time, the slope of enlightenment. I think what we're seeing is a lot of people who do not truly have expertise in the types of things. And how many people do you know who are virology experts and epidemiologists? Like, this is
totally
things our PhDs in. And we've got a lot of people who think that they understand it better than the experts. The real thing to know about this is we all want medicines that work. There's not some conspiracy to get people sick so that pharmacies or farm companies can make more money. That's not a thing that's real, and it's insulting, frankly. And that we all badly want this to get better, and the best way we know how right now is by asking people to stay home. If we start opening up the country again too quickly, what happens is there's going to be a second peak because there's not enough people who are immune to this illness yet. So if we come back to work too soon, we will have a second very bad outbreak that looks a lot like the first.
Right.
And I think people are kidding themselves if they think there won't be economic impacts to that. If they think that the economy is bad now, imagine having to start over. So that's my opinion on all of that.
Totally. I wanted to ask about, and I've talked about this on the show last couple weeks, or rather last week, I think, that it's possible that R naught value or the amount of I don't want to mansplain this to you. You're the fucking doctor. This is just what I read in 2 minutes. Dunning-Kruger effect right now, but it's possible this is more infectious than we've originally thought, which means more people have it, which means there's more asymptomatic folks out there than we thought, which means the case fatality rate is lower. Is that something that you're skeptical of? Do you think it's because you mentioned that 1% fatality rate? If it turns out a hell of a lot more people have this, that would mean that that denominator is bigger, and that means that case fatality rate is lower. Is that something that what are your thoughts on that? Do you think this is? I mean, it's too early to tell. I'm not saying to give something conclusive, but I'm just curious what your opinion is on that.
Well, there's two features. Danielle, maybe I'll let you talk about the Murray Washington model, but I think one thing to think about is, one, what rate of fatality are you comfortable with? So if we're talking about Dr. Oz levels where he's comfortable with 2 to 3% of people dying from it, we should all just go back to school.
Nice.
I don't think that that's rational.
Right.
I think that R naught is also affected by, so there's two features of it, like how quickly do people get sick? That's one feature of R naught, and then another feature of it is how quickly do people get better? But R naught is variable because the things that we do in society affect it. So R naught will become closer and closer to less than 1 if we social distance. If we stop doing that, then R naught changes. So all the models will. There's a bunch of really good podcasts that I've been listening to about this, and if people are interested in what emergency doctors are saying about it, all of the there's an education company called EMRAP, EMRAP, that's all available. All their topics about COVID-19 are available for free on YouTube. And it's something I recommend that people listen to see exactly what our educators are telling us as we try and learn about this. And it's interesting. You'll see how it changes from week to week. We're trying to understand this. We're changing event strategies as we learn more. But there's anyway, that's sort of how I feel about it. I think that it is quite likely. And then the last week's episode talks specifically about that question, Dick.
Got it. Right on. Okay, just a couple more questions, and this is a big topic. I'm curious what you both think of the Apple Google partnership to track help with contact tracing. And I'm just curious, and we're going to talk more about this actually when you in the next section once we conclude the interview here. Just talk a little bit more about what it actually is. But I'm just curious, just your kind of from what you've read about it. Do you feel it's something that could work? Are you skeptical of it? I'd love to know what you guys think.
So I think this is how I think about it. I'm not savvy enough with the tech portion of this to know how likely I think it is to work. But I will say this: if we're going to reopen the United States, and if that's what the powers that be have decided, and I'm not going to go too much into my political thoughts on that.
Totally.
I think I've made my healthcare thoughts pretty evident. But if we decide that we're going to go against what experts right now are recommending and we reopen things, then the only way that's going to be at all even remotely safe is if we've got a better way of tracking down contacts. Because it's not a matter of if we open up the economy again and if we make things back to normal as much as possible, there will be a second spike and there will be more people who die. And the only way you mitigate that is if you can track down every single contact of every single positive case that comes up at that point. And if you think that that's possible for 300 million people, I don't know if I agree with that. You might be able to make a sizable dent, but we don't have the same way that we track citizens here the way China has, and they're able to do it for all the bad things that I think about the Chinese. They were able to do that much more effectively than we're going to be able to do it.
Right on. And Danielle, your thoughts?
I mean, I think I texted you about this about 2 weeks ago or a week ago whenever this first kind of came up. And the first thing that popped off in my mind was just like, how will it be used? Like, I understand if it's used simply for kind of contacting who's been exposed, but then there's also the possibility of retroactive penalties, fines for being where you're not supposed to be, and how this data is going to be used in the future if it's all suddenly collected. And I think you reminded me something I don't like to think about is the government already has all this data, whether or not we want to think about that.
Right. Right on. Sweet. Okay. And as we conclude here, do you guys have any what are your thoughts right now? I had Colin Fedor on last time. I asked him the same question. He works in the government in Massachusetts, and I just asked him what his feeling on what his outlook is. I mean, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Are you neither? Like for me right now, I think I hit that peak 3 weeks ago is when I was most scared. Right now, I think we're kind of now in a position of, okay, we know more about this. We know what we need to do. It's just a question of how much we need to do it. So I'm just curious on your outlooks on are you feeling better than you were 3 weeks ago? Talk to me.
I think that I'm optimistic, but I'm also resolute because I don't think this is going away anytime soon. And I think what people are thinking on the order of weeks, they're thinking too small. I don't think our lives are going back to normal necessarily until at the earliest the end of 2020. And I think my job's not going to be the same ever again compared to when I started it. I think that I have come to appreciate just how big a deal this is and how much it's directly going to affect me and my family. And I think it's going to stay that way. I did want to make one last plug for it. If you're interested in some more stuff about what it looks like in my job right now, one of my colleagues, Clay Dalton, has written a number of posts or written a number of articles in the New Yorker that I think are fantastic representations of what work feels like right now. And additionally, the New York Times has done a couple of exposés on what it looks like with video inside the ERs of New York City. I think that they might be at Elmhurst in that. But New York City is getting rocked hard right now. And I think it might be helpful for people who are not seeing the effects of what this is like right now to get a glimpse on the inside.
Totally. And Danielle?
I actually had a question for Dr. Nash. That's okay?
Go for it.
Do you think this is going to have a lasting push towards telehealth?
Yeah, I think that for all the bad things that are happening from COVID-19, it's also spurring innovation in a way that I don't think we've ever seen before. There's little things like making conferences remote is easier for us. I mean, that's like a nice little thing that we get. But we are now seeing iPads are being rolled into rooms, and people are talking with their doctors on the other side of a safety piece of plexiglass. And then if you take a step back, it is always safer for doctors and nurses and everybody else in the hospital if they're not making contact with people who might be infected with something, whether or not that's COVID-19, whether it's meningitis or pneumonia or whatever else. I think that telehealth is going to become increasingly important, and I think that it'll also be helpful to offload the emergency departments in general, because currently a lot of people come to the ER who don't need to, but if we're able to have them see a doctor or see a nurse or see an NP or a PA, we can definitely offload the system. So I think this is going to be a spark under that particular movement.
Thank you.
Epic, right on. And Danielle, do you want to share any thoughts on any on your outlook on whether you're feeling optimistic, pessimistic, anything like that?
I mean, given my student status and just kind of everything being up in the air, kind of a little nervous about it.
Right.
But I'm feeling more optimistic about the number of cases that we have going on in North Carolina, and the death rate we have is currently fairly low. So that's been good.
Right on. Nice. It's always good when fewer people die. Well, let me do while I have you guys here. I appreciate you guys coming on, and I think a lot of people don't think about what the work you guys do until they're actually in the Fukin hospital, or they have a loved one with cancer, or they go into the emergency room and they actually Fukin need help. I'm always blown away when I go into a hospital. Just Fukin, it's magic what we can Fukin do with modern medicine, and I appreciate that you guys are Fukin both dedicating your lives to this shit, because this is what we need. We got to keep people, alive. We got to keep them healthy, and we Fukin need you. So I really appreciate you guys on this front. I think we all do, and now more than ever, obviously. So thank you both for coming on. Really appreciate your time, and hope to have you on in the future.
Thank you so much.
Okay, adios. That was Dr. Chris Nash and Danielle Ryder, an MD candidate. So I'm going to go ahead and switch this, get their beautiful, beautiful faces off here. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate that. So we're going to talk about this. We touched on this contact tracing a little bit on the call. We're going to talk a little bit more about this Google and Apple partnership. I think the goal is to have it released in early May, have some APIs, which are basically create a system that governments can use to help with this contact tracing thing. So they're going to release that stuff, and I'm gonna put up a couple photos of it, because I think this is really interesting. And I'm gonna put up this photo of it. So here's the official, and just a quick word on. So if you're looking at your screen right now, you can see there's two slides I'm going to show you. So I think a lot of the times when something comes out, it always blows my mind when a company will release a press release or a blog post, and then let's say it'll be Fukin 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs and they'll link to some things, but then an analysis of it is even longer than it, and it's just talking about all this stuff. So that was the case with this when they announced this, when Apple and Google both jointly announced they should go get tested as a safety precaution. So anyway, so you'll see these press releases or these blog posts, and then you see all this analysis on it that's even longer than the original content, the original post from the source. So I always encourage people to look at what is the company itself saying. What is it they're saying they're going to do? So they released some really helpful, just general information. So we're going to walk through this. So here we go. So Alice and Bob meet each other for the first time and have a 10-minute conversation. Oh, by the way, I should preface this with this would be software that's running on your phone. It's using Bluetooth Low Energy to detect which devices are near you. So that's the outlook for what this contact tracing system does. So here's an example, and I'm going to walk you through it. Alice and Bob meet each other for the first time and have a 10-minute conversation. Okay, their phones exchange anonymous identifier beacons. Then Bob is found positively diagnosed for COVID-19 and enters the test result in an app from a public health authority. Then, with Bob's consent, his phone uploads the last 14 days of keys for his broadcast beacons to the cloud. So those broadcast beacons that Bob's phone was emitting to other devices, they were changing every day. He says he's been found positive of COVID-19. He uploads that data using the app. So here's the second part of this. Alice continues. Remember, Alice and Bob met. We don't know why they met. They were both they're both married though, so we're a little uncertain about why they were on that park bench, but we'll discuss that later. Maybe put something in the show notes about that. But Alice continues her day unaware that she had been near a potentially contagious person. Okay, so Alice's phone periodically downloads the broadcast beacon keys of everyone who has tested positive for COVID-19 in her region. A match is found with Bob's anonymous identifier beacons. So her device has a list of the beacons it's been nearby. She determines that beacon has been tested positive. So then Alice will see a notification. She doesn't know who this person was. That's important. She doesn't know who this person was. She just knows that she was near someone at some point who has now been tested, I think within the last 14 days, who's now been tested positive. So Alice's phone receives a notification with the information about what to do next. So from a high level, that's what we're talking about here. So I'm going to go ahead and just go back to the regular webcam here. So it's just my beautiful face here. Okay, so a couple things about this. So there is this guy named Moxie Marlinspike. He works on, we talked about this app before. He works for Open Whisper Systems on the Signal app, which is an end-to-end encrypted messaging app. It's the best out there, bar none. He had some interesting takes on this, interesting questions about how it's going to work. And again, Google and Apple are going to release APIs. An API is just something that allows an app to it allows an app running on your phone to get extra functionality, so that Apple and Google will not be developing these apps, right? They will be developed by governments or public health institutions. They will simply use Google and Apple's technology, right? So this data is not going to Google and Apple. Let's be clear about that. So let's talk about the caveats of what the Fook this guy Moxie thinks. I think he's got some really interesting questions. So your proximity IDs have changed, but once you upload them all, they become linkable. So my proximity ID that changes all the time, that is giving it out to other devices to let them know I was near them, that is changing all the time. But as soon as I become tested positive, boom, I upload them to the public health system, whatever it may be, and then then they're all linked. So then it's each one of those, they know it's me. Now, so the published keys are 16 bytes. We're going to get a little technical here, but bear with us. It's all chill. Published keys are 16 bytes, very small. Okay, that's not very big. One for each day. If moderate numbers of smartphone users are infected in any given week, that's hundreds of megabytes for all phones to download. So remember, Alice's phone downloaded all the possible beacons that were tested positive. That's possibly hundreds of megabytes of keys coming down to her phone. Hundreds of megabytes, that's a lot of, your phone has about hundreds of megabytes, that's almost a gigabyte, right? Your average phone, has 64 gigabytes or 128 gigabytes. That's not very much. So if you don't have that much free space, so that is an interesting technical critique of this. So here we go. Here's another issue with it. If anyone can anonymously blast up keys, they can create a situation where there's gigabytes of data for all devices in the world to retrieve and compute. There would likely need to be some kind of rate limiting on a combination of stable IDs, phone number, IP, etc., to prevent it. Right? So if anyone can just join the system and just publishing IDs and saying they've been infected and just pumping up a whole bunch of fake data, that is an interesting edge case. And he says, not to mention the prank aspect of being able to light up everyone you've been near devices with. You've been exposed to COVID without them knowing you're the culprit at any time, without some kind of pretty heavy manual ID result verification at the moment of reporting. And this is what Danielle was talking about that we just had on. She was saying, okay, well, she had concerns about the data. So this is where it starts getting interesting. If we don't know, if we can't tie those keys, the keys that change all the time that then tell other devices that you're near them, if we don't know whose those belong to, how are we supposed to determine that this user has already uploaded keys, they already have an account, et cetera, et cetera? So there are times there's edge cases here that need to absolutely be dealt with. So it's an interesting question. And we'll see how it goes out. So Google and Apple, they released joint blog posts on this. So they're identical on both their websites. Props to them for doing this. So they said early May is the release when these APIs will be available. Then they also said that they're going to be baking it into the operating system at a later, I forgot what the timeline was for that, but further out. So a more something that's just always in the device and you don't download it. So we talk about, what are going to be the scars that come out of this? Wounds heal, scars are there forever. So is this a scar? Is it standard now that Android and Apple devices, iOS devices, always have this contact tracing system built in, so that when shit hits the fan, or if there's another pandemic, we can use this data and use this technology to contact trace. Now, it's an interesting question. This may always be there. This might be the new normal. So that's an interesting. We'll see how that unfolds. We'll be covering on Shooting from the Hip, and we'll be riffing on that. So okay, here's the next thing. We're going to talk a little bit about cryptocurrency. We've been talking about a lot about the markets, COVID. So let's have a little bit of fun with some cryptocurrency here. So I talk a lot about a decent amount about cryptocurrency, not lately, but my thing with it, just generally, just get you caught up. I think the price is the least interesting thing about cryptocurrency. Oh, the price of Bitcoin 6,000, price of Bitcoin 7,000, Ether, went up to 2,000, whatever. That's not what's interesting. What's interesting is the technology. What's interesting is the things you can do with it. Now, what you can do with cryptocurrency today that I think your average person would find helpful is I can send a US dollar anywhere in the world for a fee of about 2 cents. Okay, I can send $1 billion across border for a fee of 2 cents. Now, this is stable. This is using stable coins, right? So the value of Bitcoin changes. I send you 1 Bitcoin, it could be worth 5,000 when I send it to you, and 3,000 by the time it gets to you. There's now stable coins on most of them. There's a bunch of different types of a bunch of different stable coins, but a lot of them are on the Ethereum blockchain, and they are tied to the US dollar. That means you can always sell them on an exchange for exactly $1 US. Now, they might fluctuate a little bit by a few cents, but generally their value is stable. So I think that's one of the very interesting use cases of cryptocurrency. I think another interesting use case for cryptocurrency is a prediction market. So there's this company called Augur, and they're about to release version 2, and they just had a blog post. They did a full feature freeze and UX freeze, which means they're not going to do any more changes on their version 2. It's a release candidate. They're at RC1, which means they're just going to be testing it. So Augur, what it allows you to do is bet on anything. It's a prediction market. I can make a bet on anything. I can bet on sports. I can bet on the price of cryptocurrency. I can bet on anything. So this is one of those things I always think about with cryptocurrency. I'm always thinking about, okay, what's going to be, people say, what's going to be the iPhone moment? What's it going to be when it gets real, when oh shit, this technology is actually here to stay, and it's actually very useful. So I think of, okay, well, what are people doing? Well, people send people money. That's why I think stable coins are interesting. Another thing I think is interesting is sports betting. I don't personally bet. A lot of my friends do. A lot of people talk about it. It's a very important thing. So what do? A lot of the time, not every state in the United States allows it. So they use these sketchy ass websites, these sketchy ass domains, and which a lot of these allow you to actually get money in Bitcoin. But it's a total pain in the ass. You have to wait 5 days before you get your money. It's a total pain in the ass. So I think of okay, well, a lot of people do this. It's hard to do. It's a shitty experience. Well, that leaves a perfect vacuum for a new product to come out. So Augur, you could do this before, right? But it was a little clunky. The version 2 is going to make it a cryptocurrency. The value of it changes based on the market conditions, based on what the market thinks of it. If I bet 1 Ether on something that's $200, by the time the bet is over, if the Ether's only worth $100, even though I won the bet, I've lost money. So now you can bet DAI. That's the goal with it. DAI. Again, it's a US dollar stablecoin. So now all of a sudden, you will be able to make bets in US dollars. Now, DAI we've talked about on the show, it's been a little shaky in its reputation. The price of it was a little more volatile during when shit was hitting the fan with the markets. But it's still relatively, it's still a reasonable stablecoin, and I think it's going to be interesting once it's very easy. And I think this could be a big moment for people. I think, and I've told one of my friends, I'm like, dude, you can do this right now. And Augur is in between versions right now. They've kind of shut down version 1, not really, but kind of. So when version 2 gets here, it's going to be much easier to bet on the outcomes of everything. Now, when I say I'm talking about sports, I'm talking about you can bet on the price of cryptocurrencies, but what it is, it's not a betting website. It's a prediction market. What does that mean? If it's a prediction market, it means you can bet on anything. And what does that mean? It also gives you information on the likelihood of events. So maybe I don't care about the outcome of something. Maybe I want the market to tell me what they think is going to happen. So maybe I don't want to bet any money, but I can ask a question. Do I think rainfall in 2023 is going to be above or below the within 3 inches of the average of? I'm a soybean farmer, right? Do I think it's going to be where do I think it's going to be? Boom, you put this on the market. The idea is that the market will determine the likelihood of the events based on where people put their money. When people put their money on something, it leads to they've got skin in the game. They're going to give a fair assessment on what they think is going to happen. You hear the term, the phrase, betting is a tax on bullshit. When people put money down, they're going to think more about it, and they're going to be more real about it. So here's the thing. There are prediction markets right now. There's something called Predict It in the UK, which it's famous for betting on the outcome of political events, particularly in the United States. The problem with these centralized sources, even if it was legal in the US, the problem with these centralized sources is, one, there's higher fees. So there's a central authority that determines Trump was elected, Hillary Clinton lost. Okay, something needs to report the outcome of an event in order to get people paid out. So how does a decentralized thing built on the Ethereum blockchain, Augur, how does it do this? Well, it has something called rep tokens. And if you have a rep token, you can stake on an event. So you can say Trump won, Hillary lost. So you can actually give the outcome of the events. And the reason, so there's no central authority that controls it. That's the amazing thing. That is the amazing thing about cryptocurrency. There's no central authority here with Augur. It's the value. The people have a vested interest to vote on the correct outcome, because the value of that rep token that they own personally, it will go down in value if people don't trust the network. It will go up in value if people trust the network. So they have a vested interest to report correctly on the outcome of the event. So it's a very interesting project. I'll keep you posted on it. I'm very, very curious how that's going to turn out. Okay, 1:11 p.m. Eastern. We're riffing. We're at full 110% capacity right now. Let's keep going. Okay, another project. This is called Libra. Now, you may have heard of this. This is Facebook's attempt at cryptocurrency, cross-border payments. And it got a lot of ear from central governments from around the world, with a lot of questions around it. And Facebook doesn't exactly have the best reputation. So they just announced some recent changes some updates to the project and some changes. So it's important to think about Facebook. People think it's a social network. They also own Instagram. People know that. They also own WhatsApp. People know that. But they're in the business of quote unquote connecting people, right? And one of the ways, and they have the Facebook Marketplace, and they have a full-on e-commerce system on Instagram. They're trying to solve this cross-border payment situation, because right now it's very cumbersome. There's high fees. It's slow. It's atrocious. If you ever tried to send money cross borders, it's insane. Now, a lot of you hear the term remittances. People, for example, a lot of Mexican immigrants in the United States send money back to their families in Mexico. They get fleeced on fees. You're talking about 5% on fees to send for every dollar you send back. That's about 5 cents. If you're sending $500 back, let's not do math live, but that's about 5%. About $25 on that. So these are not small fees. Okay, so here's the announcements on Libra. So I should say another thing. I think Libra is one of those interesting projects. So there's kind of two routes with. Not two routes. I'm not going to only enumerate two. What I will say is there's kind of different schools of thought. There's permissionless blockchains. What is a permissionless blockchain? A permissionless blockchain means anyone can be a node on it and verify transaction. Think Bitcoin, think Ethereum. You don't need anyone's permission. You don't need a certificate. You don't need permission from Mark Zuckerberg. You don't need anything. They're permissionless completely. Anyone, you can on your computer right now set up a Bitcoin miner, and you don't have to give no one has to give you permission. That's the beauty of it. It's unbelievable that's even possible. It's amazing. The thing with Libra, they're actually moving to a permissioned model, which means you actually have to be a verified, to be a node on the network to verify transactions. You have to be verified. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that now all of a sudden your monetary, your financial life is in the hands of someone else, and maybe you trust them, but the reality is it's not distributed and decentralized, and there's a higher risk there. But maybe people don't need the whole permissionless blockchain. Maybe a permission situation is good enough. Like, put it this way. People don't care if it's on blockchain. People don't care what the technology is. They just want to be able to send $1 anywhere in the world. A lot of people don't need to do this. They don't care about it. But, there's a large percentage, or there's a large number of people that do need to do this. They don't care if it's on blockchain. They don't care if it's just in their Bank of America app. They don't give a shit. So they're not tied to the technology. So what does this mean? Maybe they don't care if it's permissionless. Well, if Facebook with Libra, which is that's their cryptocurrency project, that's their cross-border payment project. If they can send $1 anywhere in the world for super low fees, super fast, make it ready, instantaneous, that's a big fucking thing. So I want to point something out. In the United States, sending money. So a lot of people use Venmo, Cash App. That money's there. Boom, it's ready instantly. The thing is, when I'm sending money to you on Venmo, that's not me actually using the banking system. That's me just sending it to your Venmo account. So Venmo has all the money, and then they decrease $20 from my account. They increase $20 in yours. Boom. It's not using the banking system. If I were to use the banking system in the United States, we've all done a bank transfer. It takes 3 to 5 business days or whatever it is. I think a lot of people don't realize that other governments do have instant payments using the regular banking system. So I think the UK is one of them. You can send someone $100 and boom, it's in their account and they have it within it's almost. It's instantaneous, which is a beautiful thing. So the question is, are we going to get somewhere to that from official means? The government can give us something like that. Maybe it's a Libre. Maybe that if that user experience is going to be easier, people trust it more than this permissionless blockchain model, then maybe that's the one that wins. But it'll be interesting. Okay, so here's what Libre, David Marcus, the co-creator of Libre and board member, he had this to say. He had a tweet thread about some updates on this. So David Marcus, co-creator of Libre and board member, here's what he said. In the last 9 months, I keep on thinking about all the people and small businesses that could benefit from the Libre network already being operational, especially now during these times of unprecedented hardship. The Libre Association is now funded by its members, with less than 10% of the funding coming from Facebook, and has adapted its plans after engaging with key stakeholders globally. That's another thing I should point out. This is Facebook's project. They started it, but they are not the key stakeholders. They have other people, other major companies that are going to be stewards of the network. So less than 10% of the funding comes from Facebook. And if only Facebook only Facebook ran it, people wouldn't trust it, right? So they want other key stakeholders to come into it. So here, most notable evolutions are the creation of single currency stablecoins, e.g. USD, Euro, British Pound, will be in addition to the Libre coin, which will now move to a smart contract stitching together fixed nominal weights of underlying stablecoins. So the Libre coin is now just going to be based on fiat currencies, right? A fiat currency is a government issued currency. So a Libre coin, when I send you one Libre coin, Facebook or the Libre organization will require reserves of actual currency to back it up, so that when I sell it, they have the reserves. When I sell it, or however I'll sell it, when I want to convert that Libre coin into USD, they have reserves and give me the USD, or give me the British pounds if I'm converting it to that. So this is similar to the strategy by Coinbase, the Circle Consortium, which Coinbase is a part of, which has USDC. USDC has about 800 million. There are currently 800 million US dollars in value of USDC on the Ethereum blockchain. This is a project that has think of it, they have a bank account with $800 million in it, and they have that equal amount of USDC on the Ethereum blockchain. When I go to Coinbase and convert one USDC, they burn that coin. I send it to them. They burn that coin. It can no longer go in circulation. They give me $1 US from their bank account. And by the way, let's ask questions, people. If you have any questions, Charlie Finch Finley's in the chat room on YouTube. I don't know if he's on Facebook as well, but ask questions. I'll get to them at the end. Okay. So let's go on. So here's some other changes. A comprehensive network level system around anti-money laundering, combating the finance of terrorism, and sanctions enforcement. Replacing the originally planned transition to a permissionless form of governance to a market-driven, open, and competitive network. So it's no longer permissionless, and we already talked about this. Building stronger protections in the design of the Libre Reserve to protect consumers even in the most adverse situations. The other thing that changed considerably since we first announced the Libre project in June is how members of the Libre Association have stepped up in a big way. It's been so rewarding to see the organizations blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Okay. We will continue to work as hard as we can to enable people and businesses to send and receive money globally as easily as it is to send a text message and at a much lower cost. So I think this is an absolute, it needs to be easier to send money. Full stop. It should be as easy as sending an email anywhere in the world. That's where we need to get. Now, how we get there, I'm open for Facebook trying to start this Libre thing. I'm open for permissionless cryptocurrency projects. I'm open for anything, because right now it's just not working out. There's a vacuum there. Okay, we're gonna riff for a second on this. Is just something. Think of it as a break in the show. Just a break in the show. I like to share little tidbits here. So this isn't news. This is just hot takes on your boy. Okay. So I've been hunkered down in suburbia, and I've been going on my runs. And there's a lot of kids where I am. A lot of little ones. What do you call them when they're not a baby? But even I'm talking about babies too. But when they're a little taller. So they're oftentimes walking with their parents. And I'm out for a run. Okay, I'm out for a run, and they're looking at me. you know how babies, they're terminators. They look at you, or little young kids, they just stare at you, and they're just downloading information. They're just soaking everything up. They're fucking sponges. Now what happens, I'm always mesmerized by this. The child is looking into my soul, just what is this thing? And then I'm looking back at the child, and it's a beautiful thing. We're like, I see you. It's like Avatar, I see you. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And then what pisses me off, here's what always happens. And this happened 2 or 3 times to me. The parent says, interrupts this beautiful moment where we're looking at each other, we're learning about each other, we're looking into each other's eyes, and then the parent says, what do we say? And then the kid snaps out of this beautiful connection and says, hi, and then looks away. They say, hi. That's what we say. So that's what we teach kids. We don't teach kids. We don't teach. Look. Really look at the person. Really give time. Give them attention. Kind of look at them. Try to understand them. It's just like, no. What we do is we say hi, and we just keep walking. I mean, it's kind of funny, isn't it? Doesn't it make sense that if you're walking by someone, you would just kind of look at them? Why is that? You just kind of look at them. Like it makes total sense that the kid does that. But what do? We say no. What do we say? We say hi. That's what we say. I'm going to tell my kid, you just stare. That's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say, you keep staring, you keep learning, kid. Don't just say, hey. I remember fucking seeing a couple babies I was with Chris Nicholas, homie, Sean Dunn, homie. I was on a train. We were in fucking somewhere in Europe, I don't know. And these 2 little babies were just staring at each other, and they were just like communicating with, they were just looking at each other, and the parents were both right there. They didn't interrupt. They didn't say, what do we say? Hi. No. Let the kids, the kids of the future, let them do their thing. Anyway, I just think let the kids do their thing. I think it's hilarious. Onward. Okay, so we're going to talk for a second. You know what? Let me get some water here. And again, people, if you have any questions, we'll address them at the end. Damn, do we have enough time here? Holy shit, that's take longer than I thought. Okay, so we're at 1:21 p.m. We're going to keep going. Okay, so I talked a little bit about this at the beginning in the intro. Bill Maher had a clip that went viral. I suggest you watch it. Again, I'll link to all this stuff in the show notes. And if you want the full show notes, become a supporter on Patreon. Give me and Charlie a monthly contribution. We'd really appreciate that. Support the show. And also, if you become a supporter on Patreon, you can join the community. We can riff on different things, and also we'll have you on. Just you want to share your little tidbit. We kind of want to make this a call-in show, so that's also a little perk here. Okay, so Bill Maher, he had a monologue that went viral. It was talking about, he was saying why don't we call it the China virus? We've called other viruses based on where they're from, and this is from China, and it's from their practices. It's from from their fucking wet markets. He talked about, and their disinformation allowed this to spread. He's like, this isn't racist. This is just, we call it what it is. It's from China. It's a virus. That's what we'll call it. So the monologue is good. It's clickbaity, and I see what the guy's getting at. But here's the thing: I think it distracts from the debate. The issue is not whether we need to call it China virus or SARS-CoV-2 or just call it COVID-19, which is the disease, which is what we pretty much settled on. I don't care so much what we call it, because I don't think calling it this was China's fault virus will absolutely affect any policy. What we need to do is talk about how can we prevent something like this from happening again. How can we? That's what's gonna reduce the chance of a future pandemic. So we're gonna talk about the wet markets a little bit, but where it's thought that this came from. But we're gonna talk for a second a little bit about what China's been doing in their disinformation campaign. Okay, so we're gonna and why Trump withheld funding. I think we were giving the World Health Organization $120 million a year. He's withholding that now. Sounds familiar? Okay, so there are worthy considerations. There are worthy questions to ask about China's involvement in helping this spread more than it needed to. So, okay, the World Health Organization Twitter on January 14th. This is the World Health Organization. This tweet is still live. January 14th said this: preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus 2019 nCoV identified in Wuhan, #Wuhan, and then China flag, in Wuhan of China. Okay. So that was January 14th. No human-to-human transmission. Okay, the World Health Organization was saying this. Okay, which is obviously wrong. Okay, so what are China's disinformation efforts? Stanford's Internet Observatory Cyber Policy Center has an interesting post on this. Benedict Evans, who I share a lot of, he's the one that I think shared this out. So I just read through it. And here's some things it's worth noting what the campaign of what China is doing to get their to have their propaganda heard in targeting English-speaking countries. So here it is. The CCP, and I'm quoting from the article now. The CCP has been attempting to control the narrative and deflect blame. So the Chinese Communist Party has been attempting to control the narrative and deflect blame since the start of the outbreak, both domestically and abroad. It has done this by drawing on its substantial state and CCP-owned media apparatus. A lot of people don't know this. The CCP has huge funding for spreading, kind of information, information-generating bodies that are outside of China, that are working in other countries to spread the Chinese narrative. So, the Chinese government's narrative. Okay, so Chinese state media produces and disseminates daily English language content to English-speaking audiences via Facebook and Twitter. Chinese state media produces and disseminates daily English. These media properties run ads regularly to grow their audiences, which suggests that China invests in these pages as a tool for communicating its messages to the English-speaking world. Facebook's ad library shows specific regional ad targeting in India, Nepal, the Philippines, suggesting that English is used to communicate state views to a broad global audience. So remember whistleblower Dr. Li, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, Wen Liang. January 3rd, 2020, police detained and forced him to sign a letter stating he had made false comments. This was the early Chinese whistleblower that when he found out, when he was seeing an increase in cases of pneumonia in Wuhan, he was the one that was trying to disseminate this information. He was in WeChat, I believe, and trying to disseminate this, get the word out. We have something on our hands. We need to deal with it. He was forced to sign a letter stating that he had made false comments. So, okay. They also boast an early win on their from the Chinese media sources. Were it not for the unique institutional advantages of the Chinese system, the world might be battling a devastating pandemic. Now, this was before shit hit the fan, but that's the reality of the matter. Before shit hit the fan, they were saying that without our response to this, it would have been much worse. When in reality, they were keeping information. They were keeping it on a tight seal. They had the World Health Organization. They were telling the World Health Organization that humans were not transmitting this to each other. That was January 14th. The World Health Organization released that. So that's just an interesting thing. Also, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijiang said this in a tweet, and I quote, "The tweet is still up. CDC was caught on the spot. Center for Disease Control, the U.S. That's a U.S. institution. When did patient zero begin in U.S.? How many people are infected? What are the names of the hospitals? It might be U.S. Army who brought the epidemic to Wuhan. Be transparent. Make public your data. U.S. owe us an explanation." And this was after that China recently just adjusted their Wuhan death toll. I believe it was Wuhan, or total death toll of coronavirus just the other day, a few days ago, by 50%. It just completely jumped because, there were early indications of this early on that a lot more people in China were dying than were previously reported. So it's just, and I was dogging this 2 weeks ago. I was dogging this 3 weeks ago. Anyone that was saying the China numbers from China, I was like, The Economist, New York Times, these hard-hitting publications were just taking their numbers at face value. I was like, can you not put an asterisk and say we don't know what the fuck they're doing? This is a dictatorship. Full stop. This is a dictatorship that controls the flow of information and spouts its propaganda abroad. This is it's not an institution that you can trust here. And early on, they proved that they were trying to reduce the flow of information about what was actually going on. So, does that mean we have to fuck and call it the China virus? No. Though that means we have to look at these clear indications on what China did and how we can improve on early pandemic outbreaks in the future. Epidemic outbreaks to prevent them from becoming a pandemic. Remember, epidemic is local to an area. Pandemic is around the globe. Okay. So there's a Vox piece, which Vox, a little clickbaity for me, with a lot of things, but they had an interesting piece on the wet market. So people, again, in Bill Maher's monologue, he talked about we need to close the wet markets, right? Okay, so it's thought that the wet markets, let's see, what's the wet markets? You'll find, so among today's wet markets, you'll find some that sell no live animals whatsoever, just slaughtered animals and produce, some that carry common live animals like chickens or fish, and some that sell wildlife like bats and snakes. Okay, So that's what a wet market is. And what we think COVID-19 has come from a bat, and they sell in these wet markets. They sell bats. That's considered wildlife. It's not considered regular, common live animals like chicken or fish. So, the standard narrative that you've heard right now is, China's opening up their wet markets, and they are, but not for wildlife. So they're allowing the sale of chicken and fish that we know of, right? That we know of. But to blanket say no wet markets are ever allowed. Well, chicken and fish, that's allowed, right? But if we're starting to sell exotic animals and things that cause zoonotic diseases, zoonotic disease is something that goes from an animal to a human. Those are the things we need to absolutely shut down. But it's not binary, right? There's it doesn't mean all wet markets need to be shut down. It means that we probably wildlife should not be sold, like bats and snakes and things like that, because that can have a huge virus can jump from one of those to a human, and that can cause an epidemic. There's other viruses that have been like this before. We talked about them on the show. HIV is a zoonotic virus. Ebola is. These are things that come from animals and jump to humans. So these wet markets, again, it's not about do we call it China virus or not. It's about how can we prevent this from happening in the future. And I think one clear way to do that is allow wet markets, but don't allow the sale of wildlife, bats or other exotic animals, because that could increase. Or if you're going to do it, have it in a completely separate environment. Have it be very controlled. And I don't exactly know, but it is a reasonable question to say how can we prevent this from happening in the future. So these are the things we need to talk about, not what we call the fucking name of the virus. It takes oxygen away from the conversation we need to have. Now, granted, I know Bill Maher's a platform. He's trying to raise awareness, and sometimes you got to be clickbaity. That's how it works. But I'm just trying to steer this into a more productive conversation. Okay, so we got two more things to talk about. We're going to talk about the 1 year outlook. So it's 1:31 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be wrapped up hopefully within 15 minutes here. I want to keep it tight. I want to keep it lean. I over-prepared for this. I had more shit than I needed. Okay, so here's the deal. We're going to have questions in about 10 minutes. Get any questions or comments. Tell me I'm wrong. Correct me, please, and I can tell the other listeners. So post those on YouTube or wherever it is. Charlie's going to give it to me. We're going to riff on that at the end for a little bit. We're going to talk about two more things. We're going to talk about Morgan Stanley released a 1 year outlook. What does the next 1 year look like? Now, we've talked about this. There's a wide range of possibilities, right? Who the fuck knows? But it's still worth it with that understanding. It's still worth it to take a look at, okay, well, what's a possibility of what a 1 year could look like? Now, we're not banking on this, but we're allowed to have these discussions with the caveat that who the fuck knows. So I'm going to put this actually up on the screen here so you can see what I'm talking about. So this should transition. You should see this little graph I'm talking about right here. Okay, so you can see this graph. So this is Morgan Stanley, and I'll link to this in the bottom as well. So here's some quotes from them releasing this data. Now, they didn't release it on their website or something. This is from a reporter that somehow got a hold of it. But here's what he says. Excuse me. Well, here's what the report says, rather. While we understand the desire for optimism, we also caution that the U.S. outbreak is far from over. And this is what Dr. Chris Nash said as we had him on the show earlier. Recovering from this acute period in the outbreak is just the beginning and not the end. We believe the path to reopening the economy is going to be long. Investors cannot afford to lose sight of the fact that only a vaccine will provide a true solution to this pandemic. Okay, let's walk through this graph here. So you see the daily new cases, that solid blue line, and we got some audio only listeners too, so I'm not going to refer too much to the actual picture, but I'm going to walk through it. So they think peak new cases will be daily new cases total in the U.S. By around between like the start of May is basically what it looks like. A little bit before the start of May is the peak new cases. They think antiviral trial results will be here in April. They think testing capacity will be at 500,000 a day at the end of April. Last time I checked, it was at about 150,000. It's probably a little higher now. I checked about 4 or 5 days ago, so it's probably a little higher now. But they think 500,000 a day. Testing capacity at 1 million a day by the end of May. So we're in mid-April now. They're saying by the end of May, they're thinking 1 million tests a day. And then there's also serology testing widely available in June. Serology test is a test for antibodies. Why is this important? We can test if you've already had it, because here's the thing about COVID tests. If you don't currently have the virus, the test is going to be negative. It's possible you had it before, right? So that's why you have serology test. I can't even pronounce it. I'm telling everyone about it. Well, listen, I looked it up. This is the reality. Listen, I'm going to try to give it to you straight as best I can and be open about what I'm ignorant of. But here's the deal. They think available in June, they'll have antibody testing. And this is important, but we don't know for sure whether you can get this again. We don't know for sure whether how quickly it's going to, how quickly it's going to mutate. These are all very important questions that we don't have answers to right now. Okay, they also said public health departments will be fully staffed midsummer, which I thought was pretty funny. Should they not be fully staffed now? But, they obviously need to handle peak demand and they need to ramp up. But it's just an interesting little thing. Okay, potential vaccine for health workers. Oh, by the way, public health departments fully staffed by August 2020. Potential vaccine for healthcare workers in October 2020. Potential vaccine broadly available in March 2021. Okay, that's almost a year from now. They think a vaccine will be broadly available. That's almost a year from now. That's a hell of a long way away. I think it's an interesting take on it. We'll see what fucking happens here. Okay, so now we're going to talk about. Let's talk about the federal government for a second. Let's talk about the deficit. This is the last thing I'm going to talk about. Then I'll riff on some questions. So, Charlie, get those questions. You don't got to send them to me yet, but in about 5 minutes, send them to me as I get about halfway through riffing on this. Oh, send me the questions if you have any questions on what I'm about to say now. Okay, we're going to talk about the deficit. Okay, so as I talked about earlier, here's the deal with the deficit. Yes, it's about 25 trillion. The debt. Deficit is the amount. Here, let's talk about debt and deficit for a second. The debt is the total amount that the U.S. government owes. So the debt that the U.S. government has is currently 25 trillion. A deficit is the difference in how much they spent and how much they took in a given year. So if the deficit in 1 year was 1 trillion, that means they spent $1 trillion more than they actually took in with tax revenue. Okay, so we've got that. And the thing about, so again, we talked about this. The thing is, 25 trillion is a huge. It sounds like a big amount of debt, right? Wow, that's a big number. 25 trillion. I can't count that. Here's the deal. That number in a vacuum means absolutely nothing. 25 trillion is a hell of a lot more than it was in 1930, right? The debt, but our economy is so much bigger than it was in 1930. So you can't look at that number in a vacuum. Yeah, it's a hell of a lot bigger than 1930, but would you rather be in the United States today with all the the innovations and how much bigger our economy is now than versus 1930? So of course the debt is going to be higher because we're also making, there's more tax revenue. The economy is a lot bigger than it was in 1930, 1940, 1950. It's always getting bigger. So that number, a lot of people say 25 trillion. It sounds really big. That sounds really bad. If I had $25 trillion in debt, that would be you think of yourself, you're like, I'll never pay it off. Well, here's the deal. It only matters if it, think of it as on an individual basis. If you are making $100 a year, that's your salary, let's say, and you have debt of $200, that's an insane amount of debt. That's a lot of debt if you're only making $100 a year. But if you're making $1 million a year and your debt is, you have $100,000 worth of debt, well, it turns out that $100,000, it's a bigger number, but you'd much rather be in the millionaire's position because compared to how much revenue they have, and again, take this to the federal government, compared to how much bigger the economy is, the debt is actually not that much, it's not that big of a deal. So, the other time, so the real metric you want to look at is the debt to GDP. The GDP is the value of, it's the measure of the economy. It's all goods and services sold in a given country, gross domestic product. Okay, so the last time the U.S. was in a serious debt, not crisis, but a debt issue, was post-World War II. The debt level reached 130% of GDP. So it was 130%. It was bigger than the fucking economy generates in a year, which is a big level. So what happened? Well, the absolute debt since World War II actually increased. Yes, since World War II, yes, there's more debt, but our economy got so much bigger, so a percent of the GDP, it lowered. it went far down. So because, think of it as you start making more money, your salary goes up, that debt becomes less and less of a big deal. Now, another thing, what's interesting is where it becomes an issue is the U.S. government has to pay interest payments on this, right? So the Fukin, when you give debt, the U.S. sells treasuries. They have to pay interest rate on that debt. If the interest rate so I think it's at about $550 billion a year is what the U.S. pays in interest. They have to pay all the private people, corporations, private individuals, corporations, and other governments that are holding their debt. They have to pay this much per year, $500 billion, something like that per year, in order to keep in order to uphold their obligations. Now, here's the thing. That's a lot of money, but it's actually it's at about a similar percent of GDP as it was around World War II. So, or a little after. It's basically, as a percent of the economy, those interest payments, $500 billion, they were a lot less, Fukin 70 years ago, but our economy is so much bigger. So it's not that much of a burden to be paying that $500 billion in interest payments. Does this mean we don't need to care about the debt, and should we try to balance the budget? Yeah. This is an important issue, but I think people, when they see that number, 25 trillion, they think the world is falling. And listen, it'd be better if it was lower, sure, but I want to share some posts about what people thought about the debt in post World War II. So again, this is a post from Morgan Stanley. He calls "Who Pays for This?" and he quotes a couple things here. He says this. He says, the budget deficit hit a record in 1943 at 30% of GDP. This year's deficit, around 19% of GDP, will be equivalent to the deficits run in 1944 and 1945, also during their peak war years. Federal debt as a percentage of GDP is on track to exceed its previous record set in 1946 next year. In 1944, University of Illinois economist named Frank Dixon said the only way to survive the U.S. Debt was defaulting its $200 billion in debt post-World War II, defaulting on its obligations. Otherwise, a whole generation would spend entire careers paying it off. Here's another excerpt from an Illinois newspaper. June 1944, a week after D-Day. By the time World War II broke out in Europe, in 1939, the New Deal had hiked our per capita debt to $308, and by the end of Pearl Harbor to $368. Today, it's about $1,486, and it's still climbing. Somehow we feel that these figures speak for themselves, so each reader is invited to make his own editorial comment. Of course, this was 1944, so they did not do the his or her thing, but here we go. So, in 1946, the Council of Economic Advisors delivered a report to President Truman warning of a full-scale depression sometime in the next 1 to 4 years caused by the amount of debt we had. Now, so Morgan Stanley's whole point in this post, his point is that you'd never pay off the debt, you grow out of it. So if the economy gets so much bigger that the debt becomes a smaller percent compared to GDP, then that's how it becomes manageable. There's always going to be, the United States will always have debt. I think the last time we were debt free, it was paid off, I think in the 1800s, that we had zero debt. The thing is, it's also why the U.S. Can fund itself and raise so much debt. They can raise this debt at very low interest rates because people trust the United States, they trust the U.S. dollar. So people are willing to, not only corporations and individuals. A lot of people think, oh, China owns all our debt. Well, that's not true. I forgot the exact percent, but it's not. A lot of corporations own U.S. debt. A lot of people like me and you own debt. If you have like a bond account with treasuries in it, you own U.S. debt. So it's just an interesting thing to put in perspective. Okay. Barlow, hit me with those questions. If we got any questions, comments, hit me on that G-chat, Habibi, and we'll be ready for those. If we got any, if not, I want to talk about a couple more things here. So here I'm going to close with this. Okay. So what does it all mean that we need to grow out of this debt? Well, here's what it means. It means that the only way, and Mark Andreessen, said this in an interview. Okay, so hold on. So we're going to get to this closing thought, but we were getting some questions from Charlie. I'm going to address these from Nice Things. Okay, epic. Thank you, Matt Buckley, for weighing in here. Okay, he said, what are your predictions for the next 4 weeks? Earnings reports, fallout, looming protests against lockdowns, which could have the effect of prolonging the need for the lockdowns, etc. Okay, so predictions. I love it. You want to make me put. Here's the deal. Earnings reports. I'll say this. Do I think, even despite the Fed's actions, I think, and we talked about this last week, Howard Marks said, what happens in all-time market lows is that market low is retested within 3 months. So I forgot what the market low with the S&P 500, the collection of the biggest 500 companies in the United States, what that low has been, but we're I think 30% or something higher than that previous low. But he said a lot of the times in these bear markets is it's retested within 3 months. So I think I mean, who knows? I will preface this with all who knows. That's why I don't buy individual stocks except just a few. I just buy the market and just fall asleep and wake up in 40 years and that'll be my retirement. Here's the thing. We don't we don't fucking know what's gonna happen. But I think my gut says it's probably gonna get retested. It's kind of blowing my mind, even despite the Fed's actions, how much everything's come back. And to your point about when these earnings reports start to come out, and we're actually seeing these public companies are releasing the data on what their sales are. I think we're probably we're not out of this. We're not out of this. I think there's gonna be some more bumpy roads ahead. And you touched on another thing. You said the looming protests. Well, there aren't looming protests. There are protests. There was protests in North Carolina. There are protests in Michigan. I think that was I don't know where it was, but there's a big protest in Michigan. I think this is something that's absolutely going to continue and only heat up as people want to get back to work. And because it's not a good thing to keep no one's going to say it's a good thing to keep this lockdown going. What it is it a necessary thing? Yes. But the thing is, I think it's very easy, and we talked about this earlier. It's very easy to say, we got to keep it locked down. If you can do your job as a white collar worker, you can do your job remotely, and it's not that big of an impact for you. I mean, it's still a big impact, but it's not that big of an impact compared to someone that fucking needs to get back to work. I do think it's a worth it discussion to have. Now, does that mean people need to be protesting right now? I'm not saying that. What I am saying though is that it's not as if, no one should even question the fact that the government is encouraging people not to go outside and always wear a mask and things like that. So I think it's a very we talked about this in any major any major thing that goes down, right? The U.S. government expands. Take 9/11 for example. The U.S. government that was with the Patriot Act and with the Snowden leaks, we saw the U.S. government, the security, the spy apparatus exploded exponentially because of that. And it was an absolute infringement on our civil liberties, full stop, 100%. And now I'm not saying that's what's going on here. I am saying this discussion it's a worth it discussion to have. If it said protesting is a non-essential activity, which I just thought was hilarious. Well, the fucking Constitution, the First Amendment says it is. That's literally what our country's founded on. So again, should people be fucking protesting and potentially being close to you guys? No, I don't think they should be doing that. But I think it's very easy to call these people kooks. And I'm not out there protesting. I'm a big fan of protests. I think it's integral to a democratic society. But I'm not out there protesting because I think right now the calculus, it makes sense. Because there's so many unknowns. It makes sense to be on the cautious side. And Dr. Chris Nash that came on here said the same thing. It's possible we open this thing up and it's actually a bigger hit to the economy because we have unknowns and it could wreak hell of a lot more havoc. So we don't know. But maybe in what's going to be the situation we're in 4 weeks, we know a little bit more and we're pretty sure we're good. This is going to be a very difficult ongoing conversation to have and a worth it conversation to have. Again, it's not a matter of absolute lockdown or complete open. There's going to be a range there, and it's going to be important. It's going to be an important discussion as we go through these next few weeks, and we're going to be riffing on it. Okay, so here's what I want to end with, and we talked about the only way that the federal government can can make this debt issue not a major deal is to grow out of it. Oh, whoops! I still got the fucking. I love that. I still got this. I still got the chart up. Okay, I'm taking that chart off. Okay, so here's the thing. The only way that the U.S. this debt that the federal government has, which I think it's going to be, what are the numbers? I didn't say these at the beginning, but there's going to be a $3.1 trillion, 3.8. Oh, this was an estimate by the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget. $3.8 trillion deficit this year and a $2.1 trillion dollar deficit next year in 2021. So this is a nonpartisan entity making these predictions. They seem to be pretty reliable. The thing is, so the only way that that the U.S. government will will not default on its debt, and it will not wreck the economy with how much debt we have, is to make the economy bigger. So Mark Andreessen, and this is what I was getting to earlier, and I appreciate Buckley, I appreciate you chiming in here. This is what I was talking about. Mark Andreessen said, if the economy doesn't grow, it quickly becomes a zero-sum game, in that whatever person A takes is less person B gets, or person C or person D. So the only way to ensure that the pie is bigger is to make the economy bigger. And then, so rather than we're not fighting over a limited set of resources, if the total pie is bigger, now we can talk about, and we'll have a discussion another time about what is fair about how to divvy up that pie. But the only way that we're going to get through this, the only way that we're going to come out of this, and the U.S. government will remain stable, is if the economy gets bigger. Because if the economy gets bigger, that debt to GDP ratio will fall down, and then it will be okay. So don't be afraid of that $25 trillion number. We're gonna cue up this little outro music for a little bit here. The only way that pie is going to get bigger is if the economy does better, if people keep innovating, if humans keep doing what they're best at, keep creating new companies, new ideas, new products, allocating capital in a better way. That's what's going to grow the pie, and that's what's going to make this debt not a big deal. And we're going to be talking about these questions. These are ongoing questions. The federal debt, the central government's and the government's intervention in all this. There's a lot of questions. Right now is the time for questions, people. It's the time for questions, because we have 4 things, and I'm going to say them again so we really nail these home. There's 4 things going on right now, any one of which would be absolutely making headline news. We got the greatest pandemic in the last century. We have the greatest economic contraction since the Great Depression. Oil prices have their largest decline ever, and the greatest central banking and government intervention of all time. These are 4 completely huge things. Any one of them would be a huge fucking deal. There's 4 of them, all bouncing off each other, all conflicting with each other, all interacting with each other. There's no model for this. There's no look at the past and what's going to happen. We are living. We're in a fucking dark tunnel. I said this last week. So we have to be calm. We have to look at the facts. We have to not pretend we know the answers, and we have to be careful about people giving official answers, even saying what the federal government doing right now is bad, or is wrong, or what the government's doing right now is wrong, or what is the Fed bailing out? Are they should they be buying junk bonds? I don't have an answer to that. I think it's a worth it question to ask. Should they be? I think it's absolutely worth a question to ask. But these are the types of things that are going to reveal themselves as we go on. We have to be patient. We have to let them reveal themselves. It's the fucking gopher in the hole. Don't just force the gopher to come out. Let the gopher come out. Let this answer come out, and we'll see what happens. Okay, people, thank you so much for joining. This was Shooting from the Hip number 9. Again, every Saturday. We're going to try to be on Periscope next time. We're going to be on Facebook Live. Hopefully that stream worked. I haven't checked. YouTube, Twitch, wherever podcasts are available. Just search No Gradient. We stream live every Saturday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. We have Charlie Finley in the chat room, fielding questions, comments, and I do want to try to, get people on who can make it a call-in show. I think we'll experiment with that. That'll be chill. Also, Patreon, if you can support the cause. We're way below break even right now. Costs a lot to keep all this stuff going. We're using the new streaming service, so we'd really appreciate if you became a Patreon supporter with a monthly contribution as low as $3. You can join the community where we riff on things. Matt Buckley, shout out there, he's in there. We're riffing with each other. Thank you for joining. This was epic. I hope the stream went well. This was Dick Lucas and Charlie Finch Finley, producer of the show, Shooting from the Hip number 9. It is 1:54 p.m. Eastern Time, Saturday, April 18th, 2020. Thank you so much for joining. God bless. Stay safe. Don't look for the answers. Ask the right fucking questions. That's all we can do right now. That's all we can do. We'll get to the answers later. Let's let them come. Peace. Been a pleasure.